Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and a few weeks back I did a war story video, and in it I mentioned a campaign that we were doing that had an overarching story arc but had rotating game masters. And in that video I said that I planned on talking about how we did that campaign because it was pretty experimental, but it worked very well for us. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Groups that use multiple game masters is hardly new, and there are several different tried and true methods that gamers have used over the decades, such as the hub campaign. With these, they often employ a home base or location. The player characters go out, have their adventure, and return, so multiple game masters can step in, run a game, and then the heroes return for the next game master to take over for the next session. This is where you'll find your West Marches style games. These campaigns rarely have an extended story plot, as much as they're more about exploring the lands around that particular location. Another popular style is simply side quests. With these, a primary game master is running a campaign plot, but periodically a player might step into a secondary game master role and run sort of a side adventure, sort of a distraction or reprieve from the main storyline. The heroes go, have their adventure, and then get back to the storyline that the primary game master is running. These are probably the two most popular styles to having a multiple game masters in a group, but what I'm going to discuss doesn't fall into either of those. These are what I call a relay campaign. And with these, a game master starts it out, begins a large story arc or quest, and then hands that off to any secondary game masters who might want to run some of it. But unlike side quests, each adventure builds and continues on the campaign's central plot and single story. This allows all of the game masters in the group to have some ownership over the main storyline by all contributing their own aspects to it, while also allowing them to play in that campaign as players because none of them know what the full picture is. For us, this was an experiment that we tried many years ago. We were playing Cyberpunk 2020, and it worked for several sessions until one day it didn't, and then that campaign fizzled out and died. So a couple years later, we decided to try it again. We had some new players in the group, and some of them were there for that original failed attempt. And the first thing we did is we analyzed where that first attempt went wrong, and then we set up the new attempt with several guidelines in place in order to prevent that from happening again. And it worked beautifully. We never called it a relay campaign when we did it. That's just a name I came up with for the purpose of this video. But for those of us who played it, one of my players referred to this as our Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego campaign, and that ended up being the title that stuck for it. So for anyone that might want to try this for their own group, let me share how we did it and why we did some of the things that we did, and hopefully that can inspire somebody to maybe try this out or try something similar like that out for their own group, modifying or adapting it however they see fit. Now, because this was designed for a very specific type of story, game masters are probably going to need to make some changes if they want to run this for themselves, just depending on what particular type of story it is that they want to run. Essentially, this is just all a big disclaimer saying that this isn't about recreating exactly what we did, but hopefully giving enough ideas and tricks in order to help somebody make this their own, so feel free to change this up as you see fit. Okay, disclaimers out of the way, the first step is performed by the primary game master, which in our attempt was me. The primary game master introduces the world and the player characters to it. For our game, we did a few adventures and just sort of ran a normal game for a few sessions. That was then rolled into the setup or the plot hook for the actual campaign. For us, it was that there was a big bad guy that they had inadvertently crossed who now wanted them dead. Now let's talk about that villain. We learn their name, or at least the name they have used or are currently using, such as not everybody knew that Darth Vader was once known as Anakin Skywalker. There are many rumors and legends about this bad guy. Some might be true, many certainly aren't. All we know for certain is that they have vast resources and want to kill the player characters. Essentially, this is Kaiser Sose from the movie The Usual Suspects. The important thing with this type of campaign is that I, as the primary game master, had no idea any information more than that. That was all that I personally knew about the big bad guy. The fleshing of the bad guy is then performed by all of the game masters in the group. Next, the primary game master runs the initial adventure as the player characters are trying to learn more about this villain, to stop the villain before the villain can stop them. This first adventure ends with the player characters uncovering a clue. Clues are the backbone for a relay campaign. These are some sort of item that contains information that then leads the player characters on to their next adventure, and they can be just about anything. A chest, a briefcase, a file or flash drive, a bus locker key. It could even be a person who knows the information and needs to either be interrogated or rescued. Whatever it is, the clue's information or contents cannot be revealed until the start of the next adventure. This first adventure is simply about recovering and escaping with the clue. The next adventure begins with whatever they find out the clue does. Now this requires a little metagaming from your players. They have to know that once they find that file folder or whatever, they can't just learn what's inside of it right away. They just have to get it and get out of there and make their escape. There's no, I open it up right now, what does it say? Once the initial adventure hook is done, we then move on to the second step, and that's handing the game off to one of the secondary game masters. They pick the game up from wherever the previous game master left it and they run an adventure. The adventure should be 1, possibly 2 sessions at most. During that, they may give us new rumors and details about the bad guy, fleshing them out a little bit. It's through these rumors, provided by all of the game masters in the campaign, that we build the final villain. Now, one hard rule here is that the secondary game master, while they can do just about anything, one thing that they cannot do is allow the big bad guy to be captured or killed. That one's off limits because that's the overarching objective for the whole campaign. Because the secondary game master is also a player in this campaign, their own player character should take a backseat role during the session that they run, either fading into the background as a companion NPC or possibly being absent from this particular adventure, like they went off to do some other task. Sort of like in Expendables 2, once the first job was done, Jet Li is all, I gotta take this dude back to China, so you guys go on without me. I'll catch up with you in the next movie. I've talked before about GMPCs, or DMPCs as some people call them, and what makes them different from just a normal NPC companion, and why I suggest that people try to avoid running them. And that's why this guideline is in effect. The Game Master should be focusing on all the players being the stars of the adventure, and not try to run their own player character in some sort of starring role. Next, while the secondary game master may run multiple adventures, and hopefully they will, they cannot run 2 consecutive adventures. Once their adventure is done, they hand the game master baton off to somebody else. There's a few reasons behind this one, and this was definitely one of the guidelines that went into place as a result of our initial failed attempt at doing this style of campaign. First, it prevents any single game master from having too much control over the game, as they simply, take the reins to the campaign and refuse to let them go. Also, if a game master is trying to take the story into some sort of weird direction that not everybody is liking that much, the next game master that steps up can try to correct that course, versus one game master essentially holding the game hostage and then just driving it off of a cliff. Finally, while a game master isn't required to use that was left by the previous game master, they might have it where the player characters, open up the file that they recovered and it's empty. Or a sniper suddenly takes out the prisoner that they took before the prisoner can give them the information they wanted. Or maybe they insert the flash drive in their computer in order to get the files out, and that ends up sending some sort of, signal out, and it tells a kill squad to come and descend on the player character's location. So while they don't actually have to use the clue that was left for them because it's their game, they can do whatever they want, they still must leave a clue for the next game master to use, and then that next game master can make the decision whether they want to use that clue or not. Step 3, and this also happens during the course of Step 2, and that's when it goes back to the primary game master. First, while they may communicate their plans or details with all the secondary game masters between the sessions, during the game, when that primary game master is in the role of being a player, they are simply just a player. They cannot contradict or undermine whoever is running the session. If the secondary game master ends up sending the game off into some different direction that they don't like that much, they can deal with that issue later. But during the session itself, they are simply just a player, and they should be focusing all their attention on simply playing and having fun. The primary game master should also be running periodic adventures themselves, and during those sessions, while they're running the adventure, they can make any necessary course corrections, confirming or negating any rumors that were introduced either by the secondary game masters or by themselves in one of the previous sessions that they ran. Such as, let's say you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and one of the secondary game masters decides to take the game in a weird direction, like revealing that the bad guy in truth is just a two-headed silver dragon that was polymorphed into the guise of a person. But no one else liked that direction, so once you then run a session, you reveal that no, that was just a false rumor about the bad guy. Now there's some of that might still be true. They might still be able to polymorph, or they might still be an inhuman monster that's just pretending to be a human being. The Game Master should be very careful not to discount all of the rumors that the secondary Game Masters introduced. You should be using most of those. Maybe change a few details here and there, make a few tweaks to it, but definitely don't just write off everything else that the other Game Masters have introduced to the campaign because, it doesn't really fit with whatever your vision was. This is supposed to be collaborative, so you should be working with whatever they give you. Depending on the specifics of your personal group, the primary Game Master might need to run more or less adventures, like every other adventure they might need to run, or let's say you've got, 3 secondary game masters that want to try their hand at running. Maybe each of them gets a turn and then you run your own adventure after that before each of them is allowed their second turn. Kind of like you would do a combat round, everybody gets a turn, then everybody else that wants to game master gets another turn, etc., etc. I leave that all up to you as far as how you want to organize how that works in your particular group. If all of your secondary game masters are all extremely experienced or talented GMs, then you probably don't need to run as many times between them. But if most of them are going to be new game masters, all trying it out for the first time, you might need to take more turns in between their running the adventures. Next, again, when running a session, the game master's own character is relegated to a background role or is absent during that particular adventure, and this is for the same reasons as for secondary GMs. Again, we want to focus the camera on the real players and not your character who's now become an NPC. Finally, once the campaign has run its course and all of the game masters are happy and don't have any more sessions that they want to run to add to this story, the primary game master goes through the remaining rumors, finishes fleshing out the bad guy, and brings the campaign down to a thrilling grand finale. And that's essentially it. It's a very collaborative and requires a lot of trust between everybody that's going to be involved in that style of campaign. But I can say that when it works, it is a ton of fun. Now, to help you describe how this plays out, let me tell you some pieces about the campaign that we ran using this format. Like I said, it was Cyberpunk 2020. The player characters were all criminals and they were working their way up through the criminal underworld. They had a really good crime boss that was scoring them a lot of great jobs. Now, in one of those jobs, and they didn't know this at the time, they ended up ripping off the bad guy. So one day, the boss calls him up on the phone and he says that several of their friends have been killed or have gone missing, and several assets have suddenly gotten frozen or also gone missing, and none of them are safe. Somebody is gunning for them. Now, he didn't know who was gunning for him, but he'd heard a rumor or two about who that might be. And around that time, they started formulating a plan. A sniper round came in through the window, blew the head off of their boss and their good friend, and all of a sudden a kill squad came storming the building, and the player characters had to get out of there, make a mad dash, and figure out who the hell was coming after them, and then make up their plan about trying to get to that guy first. So this led to a world-hopping campaign. They went from Night City to Hawaii to Paris to Tokyo to a nomad conclave in the central US to China, Egypt, and eventually to a big floating city out in the middle of the ocean, and then to an undersea stronghold beneath. Several of the adventures were heists, another one was just a rough journey. Once we got to the destination, it was easy, but the entire session was just about trying to get to that destination. Another was that a contact had the information that we wanted, but before that contact would give us that information, we had to do a separate job for them, and then we got paid with the clue in return for doing this job. There were a lot of adventure types that we did, but all of them pushed the main plot forward, and all of them built on the story that the other game masters before them had already been building. And at one point, I don't even know which one of us introduced this little aspect to it, we learned that the bad guy at some point in their life looked like John Travolta. I mean, he had to look like somebody, right? So I reached out to the game master who was then scheduled to run one of the adventures, and I asked him if it'd be possible that maybe they could slip an old photograph to the player characters, and the game master said, sure, I can work that into my game. So I gave him this. He said, what's this? And I said, this is the bad guy and their old crew from back in the day when they were getting their start. He asked, well, who are these other 3 people? And I said, I don't know. You tell me. Maybe they're still working with them. Maybe they're now rivals and jealous enemies. But I tell you what, you choose which one of those that you want to explore and expand on, and then we'll let the other game masters choose who wants to take on the other 2. So we did, and we hunted down all the bad guys one by one. Bruce Willis, Uma Thurman, and finally Sam Jackson, or whatever names it was that we gave him for that campaign. I found this to be a really good way to give the other game masters, something to work with if they wanted to work with it. They didn't have to use it, but maybe they wanted to do a completely different adventure altogether, and that was perfectly fine if they did. But maybe if they needed a little bit of help coming up with whatever it was that they wanted to do for their part of the campaign, they could easily say, okay, for my adventure, we're going to go after that guy in the photograph. Then eventually, after going through all the characters, I brought the big bad guy in for the finale, who was created through all the rumors and the backstories that all the other game masters had created for me. So there you go. Hopefully this video inspires some group out there to maybe try something like this for themselves, or even if they don't want to do it the exact way we did it, maybe it gets them thinking is another way that they could maybe do it. Kind of give them a little bit of seeds or ideas that they could then come up with their own style of relay campaign that would work perfectly well for them. Either way, I call that a win. Anyway, that is it for this video. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up or maybe share it. If you want to see some more of my stuff, such as how-tos or RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Until next time, gamers, you have a great day and stay safe.